I am Fyodor Dostoevsky. To live without hope is to cease to live. My life was not an easy one. From childhood, I was marked by suffering. Yet it was through suffering that I found my truth. I walked through the abyss of human despair and emerged to tell the tale. I witnessed the brutality of men, the darkness of the human soul, and yet I believed in redemption. I believed that even the most broken man could be saved. Now, let me take you through the long, winding corridors of my life. From the quiet Moscow home of my childhood to the frozen wastelands of Siberia, from the gambling tables of Europe to the triumphant creation of my greatest novels. I will tell you everything. I was born on November 11th, 1821, in Moscow, in the shadow of the Kremlin, in a house where the walls whispered both love and cruelty. My father, Mikhail Andreevich Dostoevsky, was a doctor at the Mariinsky Hospital for the Poor. He was a stern, authoritative man, filled with the rigid discipline of the military class. Yet he was also deeply religious, instilling in me a fear of God, a belief in sin, and a sense of guilt that would follow me throughout my life. Our home was an unusual one, both warm and terrifying. On one hand, my mother, Maria Nechaeva, was a woman of great gentleness. She surrounded us with fairy tales, poetry, and hymns. It was through her that I first encountered Pushkin, Schiller, and the Bible, all of which would shape my later writing. But my father's presence loomed over everything. He was a hard man, a drinker, quick to anger. There were whispers of his cruelty, of his harsh discipline, even of his mistreatment of the serfs on our small estate. Yet despite his severity, he believed in my mind. When I showed an early love for literature, he encouraged it. He allowed me to read widely, filling my head with the works of Shakespeare, Goethe, and the French Romantics. But the most significant moment of my childhood was not a book. It was a death. When I was only 15, my mother died of tuberculosis. It was the first deep wound of my life. The house that once held her warmth turned cold, silent. My father became even more withdrawn, consumed by grief and drink. It was then that I was sent away to St. Petersburg's Military Engineering Academy. My path was no longer my own. St. Petersburg, gray, cold, rigid. I hated it. At the Military Engineering Academy, I was trained not as a poet, but as a soldier and engineer. My father had wanted this for me, but he did not live to see me graduate. In 1839, when I was 17, I received news that changed my life forever. My father was dead. The cause was unclear. Some whispered that he had been murdered by his own serfs, that they had revolted against his cruelty and beaten him to death. Others claimed he had simply collapsed from a stroke. I never knew the truth, but his death haunted me. It was in that moment that my first epileptic seizure occurred. Yes, epilepsy, the affliction that would plague me for the rest of my life, striking at random, stealing my consciousness, leaving me weak and humiliated. It was as though my father's violent end had seeped into my very body. I carried this wound, this mysterious burden, with me always. After finishing military school, I did the unthinkable. I abandoned my engineering career to become a writer. I was 23, penniless, and reckless. I locked myself in a tiny apartment in St. Petersburg, living on black bread and tea, writing feverishly. The result was my first novel, Poor Folk, 1846. It was a novel of suffering, a story about an impoverished clerk and his doomed love. When the great critic Vissarion Belinsky read it, he proclaimed me the next Gogol. Overnight, I was famous. I believed I had arrived. But my success was short-lived. My second novel, The Double, confused readers. The literary world turned on me. I fell into obscurity. Worse still, I was restless, drawn into dangerous political circles. Then came my downfall. I was arrested. The Petrushevsky Circle, a group of radical intellectuals to which I belonged, had been infiltrated by the Tsar's secret police. We were discussing ideas, freedom, revolution, the future of Russia. The state saw this as treason. Thrown into Peter and Paul Fortress, I awaited my fate. Then one morning, I was taken to the square. A priest came to offer last rites. The rifles were raised. The command was given. At the last second, a messenger arrived with a pardon from Tsar Nicholas I. It was all a staged execution, a cruel joke meant to break our spirits. Instead of death, I was sentenced to 4 years in a Siberian prison camp. Siberia was pure suffering. I lived among murderers, thieves, and the lowest of society. The cold was unbearable, the labor endless. I was stripped of all dignity. But I learned something there, the human soul. I saw that even the worst of men longed for grace. I clung to the Bible, the only book allowed in prison. It changed me. When I was finally released, I was no longer a young revolutionary. I was a man of faith. Returning to St. Petersburg, I found myself a stranger in my own country. The government watched me, and I had nothing. I married Maria Dmitrievna, but she was ill, and our marriage was filled with sorrow. Yet I wrote Notes from Underground, 1860, for a cry against rationalism, the first existentialist novel. Crime and Punishment, 1866, my masterpiece of guilt and redemption. My debts crushed me. My first wife and my beloved brother died. I fled to Europe, gambling away my money in despair. But then I met Anna Snikina, the woman who would save me. Anna believed in me. She took control of my finances. She gave me stability. With her by my side, I wrote The Idiot, 1869, a Christ-like man in a corrupt world. Demons, 1872, a warning against nihilism. The Brothers Karamazov, 1880, my ultimate novel, the soul of Russia itself. In 1881, my body failed me. I whispered to Anna, "Do not weep, I love you." I was buried as thousands wept, but my words remain. I am Fyodor Dostoevsky, and I will never be forgotten.